Hello, I'm honored to speak with you about my research on one of the 20th century's forgotten composers, Claire Delbos. First, I will briefly summarize her biography, much of which has not been published. Given her interesting life, I think it is important to devote as much time to her story as it is to her music. I will also speculate on her compositional language and approach to organ writing. But unfortunately, due to copyright laws, I am unable to show you pictures, scores, and relevant archival material that I have seen or acquired. Louise Justine Delbos was born in Paris on November 2nd of 1906, the daughter of a prominent historian of philosophy, Victor Delbos. At some point, Louise enrolled at the Schola Cantorum in Paris. She was a gifted violinist, and as early as 1932, Delbos performed solo and collaborative recitals at the Schola, showcasing both her virtuosic technique and diversity of repertoire. She eventually met a budding composition student of the Paris Conservatory, Olivier Messiaen. The exact time and circumstance of their meeting remain mysteries. But given the background of both families, I think it's possible the two were involved in mutual intellectual or Catholic circles. Sometime after their wedding in June of 1932, Louise used the pseudonym Claire, as the only surviving documents with the name Claire Delbos appear after 1932. Messiaen surely exposed Delbos to his budding networks, the intellectual, church, and professional music circles in Paris. In fact, surviving evidence shows that the majority, if not all of her engagements, stem from her husband. Their first public recital as a couple took place on November 22nd of 1932, the premiere of Messiaen's Thème et Variations, of which Delbos is the dedicatee. Claire frequently played alongside her husband at his new post, Église de la Sainte Trinité in Paris. Records as early as November of 1932 and as late as January of 1946 show a Madame Messiaen playing the violin at Low Mass. Their repertoire consisted of favorites like Bach, Handel, Haydn, Franck, and Fauré. Mind you, there was no piano in the loft, so Messiaen surely transcribed these accompaniments for organ. When considering her later organ music, Claire's unofficial post not only illustrates a long duo career with her husband, but also an intimate exposure to Messiaen's organ art. She surely witnessed his technical virtuosity, colorful registrations, and imaginative improvisations. Perhaps she even assisted him at the console. Messiaen and Delbos were mutual sources of inspiration, and their compositional rendezvous produced intimate creations. Messiaen wrote violin music and song cycles for his wife, like the Fantaisie or Poème pour me referring to the highest open string on a violin, which was also her nickname. Delbos composed music for her organist husband, not to mention melody based on the poetry of his mother, Cécile Sauvage. Some photos even show the couple poring over scores, most likely analyzing music or discussing their own. Delbos, along with her husband, was a founding member of the Parisian music society La Spirale, though it functioned more as a networking community rather than an opportunity for self-promotion. Know that every single performance of Delbos' music was only performed by Messiaen or his immediate circle. However, one important champion of his music was Lynn Zilgium, Messiaen's assistant at La Trinité. Several manuscripts bear dedications to this talented female organist, and she remained good friends with Claire. Despite the successes from her own project, much of Claire's life was ultimately tied to domestic duties. This was, of course, not uncommon in the 1930s. Claire did not have a day-to-day profession, and women of her time still had limited social mobility. In fact, Peter Hill and Nigel Simeon's seminal Messiaen biography contains numerous pictures of Delbos enjoying other hobbies like painting and tending her cacti. With the beginning of the Second World War, the couple's years of collaborating and performing together were over. Messiaen was called into service while Claire and their son Pascal fled to the Delbos family chateau in the Free Zone. The couple exchanged letters regularly during this period, and surviving correspondence conveys the mutual heartbreak of separation. As early as 1945, Claire showed signs of forgetful and erratic behavior. It was such a disturbance that Messiaen required a separate studio to work for fear that she might destroy his working papers. Themes of anguish surface in her post-war music, but their existence remains curious despite accounts of her diminishing mental state. Claire's decline most likely began with a hysterectomy in 1949. For fear of the anesthetic's effects on the brain, the operation was performed with an epidural. This was ultimately blamed for her gradual and debilitating amnesia over the next decade. Claire's condition required her living full-time in a nursing home, and despite the effects Claire's illness had on his spirit, Messiaen provided her with the best possible life until the end, which is April of 1959. While no one could replace Messiaen's beloved me, a young, talented pianist rekindled his spirit. Messiaen and Yvonne Loriot were married in 1961, and thereafter Messiaen never uttered the name Claire Delbos again. Delbos's music has been unjustly overlooked, not only due to her status as a female composer in wartime Paris, but also living in the shadows of her more famous husband. More unfortunate was her untimely death, a sad stigma when we look back on a fruitful career. Since Messiaen rarely spoke and never wrote publicly about her, it is no wonder that her music is widely unknown. Some of her music was published, though it is now out of print. Throughout her repertoire, we see a strong dedication to the Catholic faith, like that of her husband. Direct quotation of Gregorian chants and biblically inspired titles are windows into a devout Catholic couple in mid-century France. Her experience with the organ did not equate with amateurism. We see and hear a dark, astringent voice very different from her husband, the self-proclaimed musician of joy. Though Claire was intimately familiar with Messiaen's works of the 30s and the 40s, no modes of limited transposition, Hindu rhythms, or birdsong are found in her music, and any attempt to find Messiaen-isms in this music is futile. Claire composed 4 organ works, 3 of which were published. 2 pièces are short miniatures, the first quote from the book of Job, L'homme né de la femme vit pour de jour, and a Christmas-themed La Vierge berce l'enfant. These were frequently played by Messiaen at La Trinité, and numerous bulletins show him programming these for appropriate feasts throughout the liturgical year. This music is extremely fragile, with minimal use of the pedal. In March of 1939, which is months before Les Cors Glorieux, Claire wrote a suite based on a similar theme to Les Cors Glorieux. The End of Time, paraphrase sur le jugement dernier. Dissonant clusters, jagged melodies, and syncopated rhythms all illustrate the wrath of God, and the piece concludes with a toccata on the Sanctus from Missa de Angelis. The work was heavily reviewed by the press, including an extensive analysis by Jean Langlais. The American critic Virgil Thompson was in attendance for the premiere and declared it, quote, full of interesting chaos. Between 1938 and 41, right in the middle of the Second World War, Claire wrote a 6-movement cycle of Marian themes, L'Offrande à Marie. It was never published, which is unfortunate given that this is her most advanced music for the instrument. The complexity and originality of writing is unparalleled in any organ piece of the time. Messiaen premiered it at La Trinité after the war, a companion to his recent Les Cors Glorieux. So was Messiaen's hidden quotation of Salve Regina in the first movement, Subtilité des Cors Glorieux, inspiration from his wife's recent cycle using numerous Marian chants. My survey of these works has revealed several patterns in Claire's language. Economical concision lies at the heart of her vocabulary, whether in narrow and chromatic melodies, obsessive use of emotive, or parsimonious voice leading. Tropes such as the evocation of a berceuse, last judgment, or war are represented in obvious rhetorical gestures, not covert symbolisms. Additionally, melodic lines hover around her favorite intervals, the tritone and semitone, a lot like Messiaen. Her music is thinly textured, with often bare writing, unlike the music we see from other composers at the time. She occasionally references traditional collections like tonality, modality, and octatonicism, but the majority of her music is atonal. Her use of rhythm is also quite unique. Figures of the added value, if you know Messiaen's music, undermine any sense of traditional meter, and the interplay between rhythmically independent lines results in dizzying syncopations, what I term the Delbos stutter. Manuscript evidence proves Delbos' original conceptions to be quite bare in notation. With her notes and a few tempo markings, Messiaen applied great interpretive imagination to animate her music. Messiaen clearly orchestrated this, and she was not an organist, mind you. And we know this because there are clear markings that are in Claire's hand, and then there are clear markings in Messiaen's hand, sometimes over top and revising it. We find registrations similar to his own, such as the combination of the clarinet and nézard, or the récit strings against the positif cantaton. However, he paints the majority of her music in pale colors, like a lone bourdon or a lone gambe. I believe this aptly reflects her writing. This is not a music of Messiaen like dazzling stained glass. It is dark and it's astringent. Messiaen's copies of her music are also interesting artifacts, because they are currently the only extant documentation of how Messiaen played music, contemporaneous music, aside from his own. We know he played Dupré and Langlais and Tournemire, but his scores are missing, so this makes his wife's music all the more important. Today, with the release of her archives for public scrutiny, we can draw our own conclusions about Claire Delbos, deductions unclouded by what her husband chose to say and not to say about her. This is music from one of the 20th century's forgotten voices, once interpreted by one of that century's most influential composers.